The day my parents found out about the second will, my mother actually dropped to her knees in the attorney's office. Not because she was grieving, not because she missed my grandfather, not because she had suddenly realized what she had done to me. No, she dropped to her knees because, for the first time in her life, a choice she made out of pride had finally cost her something she could not take back. My father stood beside her, pale and silent, one hand gripping the back of a leather chair like the floor had disappeared beneath him. Across the table sat our neighbors, the Whitmans, Richard and Claire Whitman, the couple my parents had called more like family than family, the couple they had transferred almost everything to, the couple they had trusted with my grandfather's inheritance instead of me. And me? I was sitting quietly at the end of the conference table with my hands folded in my lap, listening to the attorney read the final paragraph of a document my grandfather had hidden before he died. A second will, one my parents never knew existed, one that changed everything. My mother kept whispering, "No, no, that can't be right." My father looked at me for the first time in years like I was not an inconvenience, not a disappointment. Not the selfish daughter who refused to understand family loyalty. He looked at me like I was the only person in the room who could save him. But I was done saving people who had never once protected me. 3 months earlier, my parents had sat me down in their kitchen and told me they had moved my grandfather's inheritance into the Whitmans' names. They said it was for tax reasons. They said it was temporary. They said I was too young, too emotional, too inexperienced to understand money. Then my mother said the sentence I would never forget. "Honestly, Emma, Richard, and Claire have been more trustworthy to us than you." That was the moment something inside me went quiet. Not angry, not broken, quiet. Because when your own parents hand your future to the people next door and call it wisdom, you stop asking them to love you correctly. You start watching. You start remembering. You start waiting for the truth to do what begging never could. And that morning in the attorney's office, the truth finally opened its mouth. My name is Emma Reynolds. For most of my life, I was the kind of daughter people praised in public and ignored in private. At church, my mother loved telling people I was responsible. At family gatherings, my father bragged that I was independent. But at home, those words meant something else. Responsible meant they could give me burdens without asking. Independent meant they did not have to show up. I learned early how to be convenient. I packed my own school lunches when I was 10 because my mother said mornings made her anxious. I learned to pay bills online when I was 14 because my father hated computers. By 16, I was the one reminding them about insurance renewals, doctor appointments, property taxes, and prescription refills. People thought I was mature. I was not mature. I was tired. The only person who ever saw that was my grandfather. His name was Thomas Reynolds. Everyone called him Tom. But to me, he was Grandpa. He lived in a small brick house at the end of Maple Ridge Lane, 3 streets away from us. His garden was always messy. His garage always smelled like motor oil. And his kitchen table was covered with newspapers, receipts, and half-finished crossword puzzles. Grandpa was not a soft man. He did not throw compliments around. But when he loved you, you knew it. He showed up. Every time. When I was 12 and forgot my science project at home, my parents said I needed to learn consequences. Grandpa drove through the rain to bring it. When I was 15 and had my first panic attack before a math exam, my mother told me I was being dramatic. Grandpa picked me up, bought me hot chocolate, and said, "Your mind is allowed to get tired too, kid." When I graduated high school, my parents took one photo and left early because the Whitmans were hosting a barbecue. Grandpa stayed until the end. He brought flowers, yellow tulips, my favorite. He hugged me so tightly my graduation cap almost fell off and whispered, "Don't let people who never built anything tell you what you're worth." I kept that sentence like a secret weapon. The Whitmans moved next door when I was 13. Richard Whitman was charming in the way certain men are when they know people want to believe them. He had silver hair, expensive watches, and a laugh that made every lie sound like a joke. His wife, Claire, was polished and sweet. Too sweet. The kind of woman who remembered birthdays, brought casseroles, and somehow always knew everyone's business before they told her. My parents adored them. At first, I did too. The Whitmans invited my parents to dinners, country club events, charity auctions, and weekend trips. They introduced them to better people, as my mother once said without realizing how ugly it sounded. Soon, everything in our house revolved around them. If Richard recommended a contractor, my father hired him. If Claire said a restaurant was tacky, my mother never went again. If the Whitmans praised a decision, my parents treated it like law. Grandpa saw through them immediately. One Thanksgiving, Richard made a joke about old money staying with smart people. Everyone laughed, except Grandpa. He looked at Richard over his glasses and said, "Smart people don't announce it at dinner." The table went silent. I almost choked on my water, trying not to laugh. Richard smiled tightly, but his eyes changed. After that, Grandpa never trusted him. Neither did I, but my parents did. More than that, they wanted to impress him. That was the beginning of everything. Looking back, I should have understood that my parents did not love the Whitmans as friends. They loved what the Whitmans made them feel like: important, sophisticated, chosen. And eventually, that feeling became more valuable to them than their own daughter. Grandpa died on a Tuesday morning. It was raining. I remember that because the hospital window was covered in thin gray streaks, and I kept staring at them while the doctor spoke. My parents arrived 40 minutes late. They said traffic was bad. Later, I found out they had stopped at the Whitmans' house first because Claire wanted to pray with them. I was the one holding Grandpa's hand when he passed. His fingers were cold, but his grip was still strong until the last few seconds. Right before he slipped away, he looked at me and said, "Trust the second drawer." I thought he meant at home, a memory, a keepsake, something sentimental. I did not know he was giving me the key to everything. After the funeral, the house changed. Not Grandpa's house, ours. My parents became strange, secretive. My mother whispered on the phone behind closed doors. My father started having long conversations with Richard in the driveway. Claire came over almost every day with food nobody ate and advice nobody asked for. Every time I entered a room, people stopped talking. At first, I thought it was grief. But grief has a sound. This was strategy. 2 weeks later, my parents asked me to come for dinner. That alone made me suspicious. We had not had a real family dinner in months. When I arrived, the table was set like company was coming. Candles, cloth napkins, my mother's best plates. Then the doorbell rang. Richard and Claire walked in. I looked at my mother. "What are they doing here?" She smiled too quickly. "They're family, Emma." "No," I thought. "They're neighbors." But I said nothing. Dinner was painful. Richard talked too loudly about estate taxes. Claire kept touching my mother's arm and saying, "You're doing the right thing." My father barely looked at me. Finally, after dessert, he cleared his throat. "We need to discuss your grandfather's estate." My stomach tightened. Grandpa had never been rich, not in the flashy way, but he owned his house outright, had savings, some investments, and a small commercial property he had bought decades earlier. He had once told me, "I didn't build much, but what I built clean." My father folded his hands. "The will leaves most of the estate to me." That did not surprise me. My father was his only son. Then my mother said, "But we've made a decision." I looked at her. "What decision?" Richard leaned back in his chair like he belonged in the conversation. My father said, "We're transferring control of the inheritance to Richard and Claire temporarily." For a moment, I thought I misheard. "Transferring control? It's complicated," my mother said. "Then explain it." My father's jaw tightened. "There are tax advantages, liability protections. Richard has experience." I turned to Richard. "What kind of experience?" He smiled. "Asset management. I had worked part-time for a CPA during college. I knew enough to know that phrase meant nothing by itself. I looked back at my parents. Why would Grandpa's inheritance need to go to the neighbors? My mother sighed like I was embarrassing her. "Because they know how to handle these things." "And I don't?" "You're young. I'm 26. You're emotional. I laughed once. Because I'm asking why our family assets are being handed to people who are not family? Claire's face softened into a performance of pity. Emma, sweetheart, this is exactly why your parents didn't want to burden you with details. Sweetheart, I hated the way she said it. Like I was a child, like she was already standing above me. I turned to my father. Did Grandpa know about this? He looked away. That was the answer. No, I said quietly. He would never have agreed to this. Richard's smile vanished. My mother snapped. You don't know that. Yes, I do. My father slammed his palm on the table. Enough. The room went still. He pointed at me. You have no idea how much pressure we're under. Richard and Claire are helping us. They have been there for us in ways you haven't. I stared at him. I was at the hospital. My mother's eyes flashed. That's not fair. No, I said. What's not fair is you letting strangers take over Grandpa's estate. Then she said it. The sentence that burned through whatever was left of my patience. Honestly, Emma, Richard, and Claire have been more trustworthy to us than you. I did not move, did not speak, did not cry. I just looked at her, my own mother. The woman who forgot my school events, borrowed money from me twice, asked me to manage her bills, and then called me untrustworthy because I questioned the neighbors. Richard picked up his wine glass. Claire looked down, hiding a smile. That was the first betrayal. But it was not the worst. The worst came when I realized my parents had already signed the papers before they invited me to dinner. They had not called me there to ask. They had called me there to watch. The next month was humiliating in ways I still struggle to describe. Richard began acting like Grandpa's estate belonged to him. He changed locks on the commercial property. He hired his own accountant. He moved Grandpa's investment files into his office. Claire started going through Grandpa's house with my mother, placing sticky notes on furniture. Donate, sell, keep. I found a yellow note stuck to Grandpa's reading chair. Sell. That chair still had the blanket I bought him the winter before he died. I pulled the note off and shoved it in my pocket. Claire saw me. Oh, Emma, she said softly. Try not to get attached to things. I turned around. Things? She folded her hands. Your grandfather wouldn't want everyone fighting over furniture. He also wouldn't want you touching it. Her face hardened for just 1 second. Then my mother walked in, and Claire became sweet again. She's grieving, Claire whispered. My mother looked at me with embarrassment, not concern. That was how it always happened. Claire provoked. I reacted. Then I became the problem. A week later, I found out they had listed Grandpa's house for sale. Nobody told me. I saw the sign when I drove by after work. For sale. My hands shook so badly I had to pull over. That house was not just property. It was Sunday pancakes. It was crosswords at the kitchen table. It was Grandpa teaching me how to change a tire. It was the only place in my life where I never had to earn belonging. And they were selling it like an old couch. I called my father. Why is there a sign in Grandpa's yard? He sighed. Emma, don't start. Don't start? You're selling his house? It's part of the plan. Richard's plan? Silence. Then he said, You need to trust us. I laughed because the alternative was screaming. No. You need to stop trusting them. His voice turned cold. You are not involved in this decision. I whispered. Grandpa would have wanted me involved. My father said, Grandpa left the estate to me, and there it was. The wall. The legal fact he believed gave him moral permission. I drove to Grandpa's house that night and sat on the porch until it got dark. I still had the spare key. At least, I thought I did. When I tried the lock, it did not work. Richard had changed it. I stood there, holding a useless key, while rain started falling. For the first time since Grandpa died, I cried. Not pretty tears, not controlled tears. The kind of crying that bends you forward because your body cannot hold the grief upright anymore. I cried for Grandpa, for the house, for the family I wished I had, for the realization that my parents were not being tricked completely. Part of them wanted to believe Richard and Claire because believing them made my parents feel important. That was the lowest point. Not losing money, not losing property, losing the last place that had ever felt like home. But Grandpa had not left me nothing. I just did not understand his final words yet. Trust the second drawer. And 2 days later, I finally remembered where I had heard that phrase before. When I was little, Grandpa kept a wooden desk in his study. It was old, heavy, and scratched across the top from years of coffee mugs, pocket knives, and elbows. My mother hated it. She always said it made the room look dusty and outdated, but I loved that desk. Grandpa used to sit there every Sunday afternoon, paying bills with a black pen and a calculator that made loud clicking sounds. I would sit on the rug beside him with a coloring book, pretending I was helping. There was one drawer I was never allowed to touch. The second drawer on the left. Not the top one, not the bottom one. The second drawer. Whenever I asked what was inside, Grandpa would tap the wood and say, "That drawer is for things people aren't ready to understand yet." As a child, I thought it was treasure. Gold coins, secret maps, maybe letters from a spy. As an adult, sitting in my car outside his locked house, I suddenly realized it might have been something much more important. The problem was, Richard had changed the locks. I could not get inside. For 2 days, I thought about calling my father. Then I thought about my mother saying Richard and Claire were more trustworthy than me. So I did not call them. I called Grandpa's old attorney instead. His name was Samuel Price. I found his number in an old email Grandpa had forwarded me years earlier when he asked me to help scan some tax papers. Mr. Price answered on the fourth ring. Price Law Office. Mr. Price? My name is Emma Reynolds. I'm Thomas Reynolds' granddaughter. There was a pause. Then his voice softened. Emma. Yes. Your grandfather spoke about you often. Those words nearly broke me. Not because they were dramatic, because I needed to hear that someone remembered I mattered to him. I explained what was happening. The estate, the Whitmans, the changed locks, the house for sale, the second drawer. Mr. Price became very quiet. Then he said, Emma, did your grandfather say anything to you before he passed? My heart started pounding. Yes. What exactly? I swallowed. He said, trust the second drawer. Mr. Price exhaled slowly. Then he said something I will never forget. Then it is time. Time for what? I drove to his office that afternoon. It was on the second floor of an old brick building downtown. The carpet smelled like dust and lemon cleaner. There were legal books stacked along one wall and framed certificates behind his desk. Mr. Price was in his 70s, thin, with silver eyebrows and steady hands. He did not waste time. Your grandfather was concerned, he said. About what? About your father. I sat very still. Mr. Price opened a file. Thomas loved your father, but he did not trust his judgment, especially once the Whitmans became involved. I looked down at my hands. He knew? He suspected. Then why leave everything to my father? Mr. Price's mouth tightened. Because the will your parents know about was not the final arrangement. My breathing stopped. He continued, your grandfather created a conditional trust and a second will. It was not meant to be revealed unless certain actions occurred. What actions? Mr. Price looked directly at me. Unauthorized transfer of estate assets to third parties. Sale of the family home without review. Evidence of coercion, manipulation, or reckless mismanagement. The room seemed to tilt. Are you saying... I am saying your grandfather anticipated the possibility that your father might be pressured into doing exactly what he did. I covered my mouth. For the first time since Grandpa died, I felt something other than grief. Hope, small, fragile, almost painful. Mr. Price leaned forward. Emma, your grandfather did not leave you nothing. He slid a sealed envelope across the desk. My name was written on the front in Grandpa's handwriting. Emma. I stared at it so long the letters blurred. Inside was a letter. Not legal language, not formal instructions, just Grandpa. My hands shook as I unfolded it. Kid, if you are reading this, it means your father forgot the difference between being generous and being foolish. I wish I could protect you from the pain of that. I cannot. But I can protect what I built. You were always the one who paid attention. You were always the one who saw people clearly. That is why the second will names you as trustee and primary beneficiary of the protected assets if the estate is transferred outside the family without proper cause. Do not let guilt make you smaller. Do not let people call you selfish because you refuse to let them burn down what I built. Trust the second drawer. I love you. Grandpa. I cried in that office, quietly. Mr. Price did not interrupt. He simply placed a box of tissues beside me and waited. For the first time, I understood. Grandpa had seen the storm before anyone else, and he had left me a shelter inside it. But hope does not mean victory. Not yet, because the Whitmans had already moved fast. And Richard Whitman was not the kind of man who handed back control just because the truth asked nicely. The legal process took 3 weeks, 3 of the longest weeks of my life. Mr. Price filed the necessary documents to halt the sale of Grandpa's house. He notified the financial institutions connected to the estate. He sent formal letters to my parents, Richard, Claire, and every professional involved in the asset transfer. I expected my parents to call me. They did not. Richard did. The first call came at 8:13 on a Monday morning. I saw his name and almost let it go to voicemail. Then I answered. Emma, he said smoothly. I think there's been a misunderstanding. Of course, men like Richard never get caught. They get misunderstood. What misunderstanding? He chuckled softly. Your grief is making this complicated. There it was. The first weapon, my emotions. He continued. Your parents asked us to help. We stepped in because your family was overwhelmed. Now you're creating unnecessary legal conflict. I looked at Grandpa's letter on my kitchen table. Then you should have no problem showing full accounting records. Silence. Just 1 second. But I heard it. Then Richard said, You're out of your depth. I smiled even though he could not see it. I've been told that before. You are risking your parents' financial future. No, I said. You did that when you accepted control of assets that were never meant for you. His voice hardened. Be careful. I hung up. That was the first time I felt the old fear loosen its grip. The second twist came when Mr. Price received the accounting records. Not complete records. Messy ones. Inconsistent ones. Records that told a story Richard never intended anyone to read. The Whitmans had not simply been holding assets. They had moved money into accounts connected to one of Richard's businesses. They had advanced themselves management fees. They had used estate funds to pay for consulting. Claire had purchased furniture from Grandpa's house for almost nothing through a private sale listing. The commercial property had been prepared for transfer to a shell company. And the house? Grandpa's house had already been promised to one of Richard's associates below market value. I read the report sitting in Mr. Price's office. Every page made me colder. Not angrier, colder. Because anger burns. Clarity freezes. My parents had not just been careless. They had handed the keys to predators and called it sophistication. Then came the final twist. The second will did not only remove my father's control if assets were transferred improperly, it required all transferred assets to be clawed back into the trust. It named me successor trustee. It granted me legal authority to suspend sales, audit transactions, remove outside managers, and pursue recovery from any party who benefited from improper transfers. In plain English, Grandpa had left my parents a test. They failed, and when they failed, everything moved to me. Not because I stole it, not because I manipulated anyone, because Grandpa knew who could be trusted when the room filled with liars. The hearing was scheduled for a Thursday morning. My parents arrived with Richard and Claire. That alone told me they still had not understood. My mother would not look at me. My father looked angry. Richard looked confident. Claire wore pearls and a soft gray dress, like she was attending a charity brunch instead of being questioned over estate mismanagement. Mr. Price sat beside me. Stay calm, he whispered. I am, and I was. Because for once, I was not the person begging to be believed. The documents were going to speak for me. The judge reviewed the filings. Mr. Price presented Grandpa's second will. Richard's attorney objected. The judge overruled. My mother shifted uncomfortably. My father frowned. Then Mr. Price began explaining the conditional trust. With every sentence, my parents' faces changed. Confusion, concern, fear. Richard leaned toward his attorney, whispering rapidly. Claire's hands tightened in her lap. Then came the accounting records, the transfers, the management fees, the consulting payments, the below-market sale agreements, the shell company. By the time Mr. Price finished, nobody in that room looked confident anymore. The judge ordered an immediate freeze on remaining assets and recognized me as interim trustee pending full review. My mother gasped. My father turned toward Richard. What is he talking about? Richard did not answer. That was the moment my parents finally began to understand. The neighbors they had trusted over their own daughter had not been protecting the inheritance. They had been draining it. And the daughter they called untrustworthy was now the only reason anything was left to save. But the real confrontation happened 1 week later, in the attorney's office, the day my mother fell to her knees. Mr. Price scheduled the meeting for 10 in the morning. He wanted everyone present. My parents, Richard and Claire, their attorney, me. I arrived early. Not because I was nervous, because Grandpa always said, the person who arrives early owns the room before anyone speaks. So I sat at the end of the conference table with Grandpa's letter in my purse and the second will in a folder in front of me. My parents arrived next. My mother looked like she had not slept. My father looked smaller somehow. Not physically, morally. Richard and Claire came in last. Richard did not smile at me this time. Claire avoided my eyes completely. That told me more than words could have. Mr. Price began. He summarized the court's temporary order, the asset freeze, the investigation, the clawback process, the possible civil claims. With every sentence, my mother's breathing became shakier. Finally, she interrupted. Can we still fix this? Mr. Price looked at her. That depends on what you mean by fix. She looked at me then, really looked at me. Not as the annoying daughter, not as the emotional one, not as the person making things difficult, as the person holding the last rope above a hole she had helped dig. Emma, she whispered. Please. I said nothing. My father cleared his throat. We didn't know they were doing that. I looked at him. No. He blinked. No? You didn't want to know. The room went silent. I turned to my mother. You didn't want to know when I asked questions at dinner. Then to my father. You didn't want to know when I told you Grandpa would never have agreed. Then to Claire. You didn't want anyone to know when you started pricing his furniture like it was garage sale trash. Claire's face flushed. Richard leaned back. This is becoming emotional. I looked at him. For years, you used that word like a leash. His expression froze. Emotional daughter. Grieving granddaughter. Too young. Too inexperienced. Too attached. I leaned forward. You called me emotional because you were terrified I was paying attention. For once, Richard had no clever response. My mother started crying. I'm sorry. I had imagined those words so many times. I thought they would feel like relief. They did not. They felt late. My father whispered, We trusted the wrong people. I shook my head. You distrusted the right one. That hit harder. I saw it land. My father looked down. My mother covered her mouth. Richard's attorney advised him not to speak, which was probably the smartest thing anyone had told him in years. The consequences came slowly, then, all at once. The sale of Grandpa's house was canceled. The commercial property remained inside the trust. The accounts were frozen and audited. Richard was forced to return improper fees. Claire had to return several items she had taken from the house under suspicious private sale arrangements. The shell company transfer collapsed. Civil claims followed. The Whitmans disappeared from the neighborhood within 6 months. Not overnight. People like them rarely vanish dramatically. They fade. Invitations stop. Phones stop ringing. Doors stop opening. Their reputation, the thing they valued most, became the first asset they could not recover. As for my parents, they did not lose everything, but they lost control. That mattered more to them. The inheritance they tried to hand to the neighbors was placed under the trust. I became trustee. Every major decision required documentation, review, and approval. My father hated that. At first. Then, months later, he admitted something I never expected. Your grandfather knew me better than I knew myself. I did not comfort him. Some truths are supposed to hurt. They are not punishments. They are corrections. And that was what finally happened to my family. A correction. Not revenge. Not destruction. A correction long overdue. A year later, I was sitting on Grandpa's porch watching the sun go down. The house was mine now, not because I fought for it, not because I won it, because Grandpa had protected it. Protected it from greed, protected it from manipulation, protected it from people who confused ownership with entitlement. The porch looked almost exactly the same. The old wind chime still hung near the front door. The maple tree still leaned slightly toward the driveway. The garden needed work. Grandpa would have complained about that. I smiled at the thought. Some memories stop hurting after a while, not because you forget them, because they finally settle into the place where they belong. My parents and I were speaking again, carefully, slowly, like people rebuilding a bridge after a flood. Things were different now. Not perfect, different. My mother no longer gave advice I didn't ask for. My father no longer dismissed every concern as emotional. The first time they visited after everything happened, we sat at Grandpa's kitchen table, the same table where he used to do crossword puzzles. Nobody spoke for several minutes. Then my father looked around the room. His eyes stopped on an old photograph hanging near the hallway. Grandpa and me. I was 12, covered in grease after helping him repair a lawnmower, both of us laughing. My father stared at that picture for a long time. Then he said quietly, "He trusted you." Not a question, a realization. I nodded. He did. My father looked down at his hands. I spent years thinking he didn't trust me enough. I waited. Eventually, he continued. Now I realize he trusted me exactly as much as I'd earned. That sentence changed something. Not because it fixed the past, because it showed me he finally understood it. My mother cried. Not dramatically. Not the way she used to cry when she wanted sympathy. These were different tears. The kind people cry when they stop defending themselves. "Emma," she said softly, "I thought being loyal meant standing by people no matter what." I looked at her, and now? She wiped her eyes. "Now I think loyalty means protecting the people who would protect you." For the first time in years, I believed her. Not because she said the right thing, because she had finally learned it the hard way. The Whitmans never returned to our neighborhood. Occasionally, I would hear rumors, a failed business deal, a move to another state, a lawsuit, lost investments. People talk, especially when someone spends years building an image that eventually collapses. But I stopped paying attention because Richard and Claire were no longer the center of my story. Neither were my parents. I was. That might sound selfish. For a long time, I would have thought so too. But there is a difference between selfishness and self-respect. Grandpa understood that. For years, I didn't. Then, one evening, while cleaning out his workshop, I found an unfinished note tucked inside a toolbox. Just a scrap of paper, probably forgotten, probably never intended for anyone else to see. But I recognized his handwriting immediately. The note said, "The people who deserve your trust are the people who protect you when protecting you costs them something." That was it. One sentence. No signature. No explanation. Just truth. I folded the note and slipped it into my wallet. It still lives there today. Because that sentence explains everything. The inheritance. The second will. The neighbors. My parents. Even me. Family is not who stands beside you when everything is easy. Family is who protects your future when doing so requires courage. My grandfather did. My parents didn't, at least not then. And that is why, in the end, The second will was never really about money. It was about character. Money simply revealed who everyone already was. If this story meant something to you, I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. What would you have done if you were Emma? Would you have forgiven your parents? Would you have fought to save the inheritance? Or would you have walked away and never looked back? Sometimes the deepest betrayals don't come from enemies. They come from the people who are supposed to protect us. And sometimes the most powerful victories aren't about revenge. They're about truth, about finally being seen, about refusing to let someone else's bad choices define your future. If you've ever been overlooked, underestimated, betrayed, or treated like your voice didn't matter, remember this. The right people won't ask you to become smaller so they can feel bigger. And the truth has a strange way of surviving, even when powerful people try to bury it. If you enjoyed this story, please like the video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications. Every week, we share powerful stories about family betrayal, hidden secrets, emotional justice, and the moments when life finally turns the tables. Thank you for listening. And remember, sometimes the inheritance worth fighting for isn't money. It's knowing your worth before someone else decides it for you.